Good evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's review. Tonight, we shall be reviewing Tomatin Highland Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. This is 12 years old. That's the age statement on it. And it's been aged in sherry barrels. Um, Now, oops, that was a little bit too much, but what do I mean? There's no such thing as too much scotch, I tell you. No such thing at all. So, as I said, this was aged in sherry, and I found this on sale at Foodland. It's pretty rare that you'll find a bottle of scotch of any type for under $30 in Hawaii, and this particular bottle was about $27, tax included. So, obviously, I had to get it. Now, this is something that has really changed since I opened the bottle. When I showed you the bottle, you noticed it was already over halfway empty. When I first popped open the bottle, it was so redolent of Pedro Jimenez sherry that you literally couldn't taste anything else other than the sherry. And, you know, sherry and peat, more or less. Now, I didn't have a problem with that because I love Pedro Jimenez sherry. The only thing I don't like about Pedro Jimenez sherry is that I often find it too sweet. So basically, this, which was more dry and had, a bit more of a kick to it, it was like an improvement on Pedro Jimenez sherry. But the Pedro Jimenez sherry notes, while still there, have lessened somewhat as the bottle has gone down. So I figure a lot of that stuff is pretty volatile, things that kind of blow off into the air pretty quickly. Now the color of this is pretty, yeah, say about a golden amber. I don't know much about Scotch colors though. I do beer colors. Nice and thick. So the first thing that you smell when you nose this glass is Pedro Jimenez sherry. Um, Pedro Jimenez is sort of a dessert sherry. It's often the primary grape in those cheap, sack sherries that you'll find in the store. And as a single varietal, is often very popular by itself. And one popular way to drink it is to pour it over ice cream. That's how rich, thick, and sweet it is. So there's that very much that dried fruit, raisins, nuts. Um, that Pedro Jimenez sherry is very relevant of a dessert cake. One made out of dried fruits, nuts, and alcohol. So yeah, it's kind of a fruitcake smell to it. Now, a type of fruit, well, obviously raisins. I'm getting hints of pears, apples, just like all different kinds of dried fruits playing with each other. Maybe even, actually, pears might be just juicy, that juicy essence of pears. And there's some peat, that slight peat underlying all of it, just a very slight hint of smokiness. This is not a very heavily peated scotch. In fact, this is probably the least peated scotch I've ever had. In the same way, a lot of the more initial notes are of that Pedro Jimenez sherry. Only instead of the very sweet nose, it's sort of middle in between sweet and dry here, and that the fruit elements of it are kind of muted compared to the nutty elements in that sort of mid-palate taste. Fruits are very immediate, and they're the ones that pop up. And then there's like this nuttiness, oakiness. Then there's that peat that comes in and just clears the palate and, banishes the rest of the sweetness and just makes it a very dry, I'm not going to say smoky, but smoky, sort of smoky oaky finish, really. So it's a nice contrast in between that sort of burst in between, sort of sweet fruits at the beginning, then transitioning to nutty, and then, there's dry peat at the end. Finish kind of stays with you, and what's nice is that the sherry kind of pops up again in that finish. You'll just kind of see it peeking its head through that peat flavor there. Now, overall, for the price point, you're not going to be able to beat this. I hear it's cheap wherever you're able to find it. That said, if you're somebody who likes peat bombs or like intense complexity, you're probably not going to get that from it. What complexity it has is basically derived from the sherry barrels. So, all these things I'm tasting are elements of the sherry barrels, and not so much the malts used. Though there is probably a hint of malt, and it's got a very good mouthfeel to it. I'm not going to say it doesn't drink hot at all, but like I said, it's someone who's really big into Islay single malts probably wouldn't like it. But if you're like me and you're not very picky because you're into drinking bourbon or rye whiskey or any kind of whiskey at all, this is definitely just a great cheap, cheap in price but not cheap in quality Scotch for you to pick up. And even better yet, it's a great one to have around for Scotch novices, people you want to introduce to Scotch, because it's not overwhelming and it's not going to just smack the person, the newbie in the face with, peat or with, very intense tastes and smells. It's going to be something that's pleasant. It's going to be something that's a good introduction. But as you get along to it, you'll find yourself probably not drinking this to really savor it, but drinking it because it's quality and because you want a nice Scotch to drink while you're, say, playing Civilization 4 like I was earlier. So, in all, Tomatin 12-year single malt. Recommended as an introduction to Scotch and as a Scotch you really don't have to think about. Well, that's all for tonight.